The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Can someone help me? I'm Vivi. I'm 19 years old, and I'm trying to escape my town of New Haven. If any kids in New Haven happen to see this, can you let me know? I'll go over the details at the bottom of this post, but I want to clarify that I'm hiding behind the wall near the town exit. If you are an adult and come near me, I will shoot you. I'll start from the beginning. 2 weeks ago, I was living in an apocalyptic world. Ren tasted like chicken. I was told to douse him in BBQ sauce, which made him easier to swallow, but he was still too dry, stringy, and stuck in my teeth. This is the lifestyle I grew up with. I've only ever known this way of living and surviving. Father told us to treat Ren like food, to detach ourselves completely. But I couldn't let go of 18 years with him just like that. I grew up with Ren, freckled cheeks and lopsided smiles. Ren. We shared bunk beds, and he used to tell me scary stories to help me sleep. As we grew up together, we became closer, and he became the joker of our little group. When morale was low, he was always there to crack a joke and maintain a wide smile, despite being terrified himself. I admired his ability to wear a mask and pretend everything was okay, even when we sacrificed our friends. The night prior to his death, Ren climbed into my bed and told me his theories about his parents. He was positive they were still alive, and he was going to find them. When it was safe to go back to the surface, that was. Ren didn't remember a lot about his childhood, but he did know his parents were in the medical field. I found myself wearing his threaded jacket, the one he insisted on me keeping if he was ever chosen. He loved that jacket. Apparently, his 3-year-old self was wrapped up in it when Father found him. Now, Ren was stuck at the back of my throat. I kept chewing, but the more I swallowed, the sicker I felt. I wasn't even hungry, but Father insisted. If we were going to give our thanks for him keeping us safe and away from the surface, we had to obey every order Father gave us. Ren told me not to be upset and not to miss him. I tried not to. Father always said we had to detach ourselves from the food. That was the only way we were going to enjoy it. But I did miss Ren. The empty spot next to me felt cavernous and hollow. I missed his head on my shoulder. I missed late-night talks with him and confessing I maybe had a crush on him at the age of 9. He laughed and said, "Maybe when we're old enough, you can ask me to marry you." I don't think even he realized how powerful his words were, that I would marry him in a heartbeat if we were just normal kids in a normal world. It wasn't fair that I missed Ren as much as I did. I spat him out into my bowl, draining the rest of my water. Gross, Jack grumbled from across the table. I shot him a glare, and he stuck out his tongue. Jack was the oldest among us, but you wouldn't think so by looking at him. Small and scrawny, with little meat on him, Jack was the definition of a squirt. Illuminated by the flickering candlelight, the others were eating, their faces cast in an eerie glow as they listened to Father's stories. I knew them all by heart. Father had been recounting the same tales since I was a little kid. When we were 3 years old, the world ended in what was called the disaster, a terrifying phenomenon that swept across the planet, turning adults into feral predators of their own children. Nobody knew how it happened. Some people hypothesized it was bioterrorism, while others insisted it was natural human evolution. All living things consumed their young, and now it was humanity's turn. According to Father, who vividly described the horrific experience of devouring his own son, it was a thirst unlike anything he had ever felt before, something he couldn't control or suppress. It burned right through logic and love, transforming every adult, every parent, into a cold-blooded, flesh-eating monster. Not a zombie. Father made sure to add. Zombies are mindless corpses brought back to life. They are fictional monsters. This was different. The ones affected did not lose their minds. They lost their humanity. Father averted his gaze from us. When I became afflicted with this phenomenon, my son was like nicotine, stronger than any black market drug. He cleared his throat. There was no right or wrong, no morals left in me. I was an animal when I killed and skinned him, cooking him into a hot stew. Father's smile was sickly. I didn't feel regret or pain. I wanted more. I wanted to feast on him until my stomach was bulging. His voice splintered apart. I killed and ate my son, and I didn't even care. I don't remember my son's name. Whatever this thing was, it took it away. It took away my memories of him, my love for him, my want to protect him, and turned me into a loveless monster. Father sighed, but it didn't end there. When it became known that children's flesh wasn't just like a drug to adults, but also granted youth and immortality when eaten, the planet fell into chaos. World leaders came apart first. Initially, a treaty was made among adults unaffected by the phenomenon. The Children's Association was born, created to protect and save kids from the feral adults. However, there was no Children's Association. Instead of trying to save kids, the governments were consuming them. Older kids who survived were taken in and brainwashed, converted into bounty hunters and tasked with hunting us down. Stray kids in hiding who managed to survive being eaten were given a nickname: threads. Apparently, when eaten, our flesh was stringy and thread-like. Father hid underground from the war going on between surviving older children who fought back, and the feral adults hunting them down like animals. He took a group of young kids with him. There were 15 of us, now 6. I didn't remember much about my life before the disaster, but I did know I had a mother and father. One day, they walked out the door and left me watching cartoons. Mom told me she was going to be right back. Halfway through an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, Father wrapped his arms around me and carried me from my home to safety. Father did admit his original intention was to eat us. He never tried to sugarcoat his own craving for flesh, and that he too was just as monstrous as the adults hunting us down. But the longer he stayed isolated from the surface, Father named each of us. At first, it was to give us an identity, so he'd feel less guilty about killing and eating us. Once he'd named us, however, Father had to become a real parent to avoid us getting caught, which meant feeding and clothing us, singing lullabies, and spending hours struggling to get us to go to sleep. I guess fatherhood began to hit him. It's not like he wanted it, but he'd grown maternal towards us. He started to feel human again, growing attached to his food. As we grew up, he taught us everything we needed to know. Basic academics, along with life skills like cooking food and typing. But that didn't stop his insatiable hunger. He promised to keep us safe from the adults, for one small favor. Ren was the last to continue our favor. He was almost 6 months old, refrigerated bloody chunks piled in my bowl. Maybe that was why I felt so sick and couldn't eat. Father was getting hungry for fresh meat again. Part of me thought maybe his hunger had gone away. I did see him eating rice more often, but after he ravaged his way through Ren, I guessed wrong. When Father got to his feet, abruptly abandoning his latest story, the others went silent. Jack and Elsa were talking about a book they were reading, but once Father made it obvious he was reaching for the playing cards on the small table by the door, the two of them drifted off, their eyes going wide. Alia and Phoebe were already waiting for it. Neither of them had spoken all day, both of them ignoring their food. When Phoebe started crying, I wanted to comfort her, but what could I say? I didn't want to be sacrificed either. Phoebe, Father's voice was a warning, be quiet. I had always seen Father more as a shadow, less of a human. I never really saw much of a face or an identity, just an outline of a person. In this case, I was happy I couldn't see the grinning smile spreading across his lips. only the slight contortions in his jaw. The room suddenly felt too small, claustrophobic, like it was going to swallow me up. Our home had always been small, a singular rectangular-shaped bunker underground. This place was cramped, with concrete walls absorbing the faded light from bare bulbs hanging from the low ceiling. The air was always damp and made my skin feel gross, and it always smelled like sulfur. Father was never specific about what it was or how he had obtained it. He just said it was our home. The bunker was divided into two cramped sections, a communal area where we ate and did daily activities, a tiny sleeping quarters with thin, uncomfortable mattresses as well as a single bunk bed, and a storage room filled with supplies Father had gathered over the years. There were no windows, and the heavy, reinforced door was the only connection to the outside world through underground tunnels. The feeling was all too familiar, the sensation of drowning, suffocating, knowing my time could be up. Jack couldn't stand still, tapping a beat on the ground. Elsa and Cal were frouncing, their expressions hard to read. I had never thought about what it would be like to be eaten. I used to try and put myself in a chicken's shoes. Father had a laptop we were allowed supervised access to, no internet, but a whole database filled with his own research on this phenomenon. He compared us to chickens, living things with thoughts and memories and families, dragged from their homes and killed for food. Just like kids, adults didn't need chicken meat to survive. They wanted it, craved it like a drug. Father held out the playing cards with a reassuring smile that I didn't believe. He wasn't smiling to make us feel better. Father was smiling because he was hungry. All right, everyone, let's play. Father's expression made me nauseous. His tone was enough to make us stand up. Jack jumped up first. He was visibly trembling. When Elsa and Cal didn't move, he pulled them to their feet too. It hit me when Father was shuffling the cards, playfully nudging a petrified Jack with his shoulder. He never meant to save us. If anything, he only kept us alive so he wouldn't be lonely. The six of us stood in suffocating silence, fear palpable on our faces, the type I can't even describe. How can I possibly put that kind of feeling into words? The existential dread of what comes after death and the terror of being eaten. The whirlwind of endless what-ifs and could-have-beens. I could have grown up in a world where I went to school and graduated. I could have had loving parents who supported me. I could have turned 20 years old and asked Ren to senior prom, and then to marry me. Something warm slithered its way up my throat. I could have escaped 2 years ago with Ren, when he begged me to go with him. Vivi. Father's voice snapped me out of it, and I was suddenly all too aware that I was wearing my dead best friend's jacket. I could feel my skin crawling, phantom bugs filling my mouth. Ren wanted to leave, and I told him we were safe with Father, but that was when there were more of us, and less of a chance of being chosen. I wanted to be selfish. I wanted to turn my head and pretend the real monster wasn't right in front of me. Father cleared his throat impatiently, and I squeezed my eyes shut, reached forward, and plucked a card from the flimsy stack. The rules of the drawing were simple, and yet I could barely think straight. All we had to do was not pull a joker. 6 cards, and among them, 1 joker. For the unlucky player, they had officially offered themselves as meat to Father. I was yet to look at my own card, squeezing it into my fist. I could hear our combined breaths, our screaming pleas to any god listening. Jack drew a queen, his face lighting up. He looked like he might say something before stepping back, clearing his throat. Elsa, visibly trembling, drew a 4 of hearts, her hands shaking. Cal hesitated for a moment, his brows furrowed in concentration, before drawing a 6 of hearts. Alia folded her arms, exhaled, and drew a king. Phoebe, who looked like she was about to throw up, pulled a jack. Squeezing my card in my palm, I couldn't breathe. The others were staring at me, and I knew what they were thinking. 6 cards, 6 players, 1 joker. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in my home. I was imprisoned inside a slaughterhouse, and the walls were closing in. I remembered when Ren drew a joker and burst out laughing. He couldn't stop, even when I tried to calm him down, tried to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything was going to be okay. I felt his tears soaking my shoulder and his sobs rattling his chest, his lips grazing my ear, telling me things that never fully registered. We should have ran. His voice dripped with disdain that only truly hit me when I was in his place. Ren didn't smile at me when he died. He never forgave me. Why didn't we run? I couldn't understand why he was laughing. Why, despite his hollowed-out eyes, he was smiling like he'd won the game. But drawing that joker myself, I felt it, hysterics creeping up my throat. I laughed. It felt wrong, hollow, and alien, but also good. The concept of being eaten alive was suddenly so ridiculous that I was on my knees, howling into my arms, my body trembling with laughter I couldn't control. I tried to stop, tried to stifle my giggles with one hand clamped over my mouth, but it kept coming, slamming into me in waves of revulsion. I thought Ren was possessed by the Joker card, but now I understood it. I finally understood the feeling of complete despair washing over him. When I stopped laughing, I had already made my decision. I was going to die with a smile on my face, just like Ren. The others were frowning at me, mixed looks on their faces. "I'm sorry, Vivi," Jack whispered. His expression, however, said, "Sorry it's you and not me." Alia and Phoebe stepped back, as if I was suddenly contagious. Cal offered me a small smile, and that was enough. I'm glad it wasn't pitiful. It was just a smile. With the joker in my hand, I readied myself to die. But there's a difference between being brave and being a coward. Between Ren Samuels and me. I watched him die with his head held high, and I was sure, in that disorienting moment of post-reality, that I could follow in his footsteps. However, my eyes were wandering, and my palms were growing clammy. Father was in the corner preparing his blade, and knowing that it would slice through my flesh and turn me into salty chicken, something in me snapped. I was a coward. I wasn't brave like Ren or Becca, or Thomas and Jonas. I was a fucking coward, and I wasn't going to die. The world felt like it jumped into fast forward. I was aware I was twisting around, and it took 2 single breaths, one to get me to the door, and another when I was twisting the handle and yanking it open. The hunt began as soon as I catapulted myself from what I thought was home. There was never a hunt with the others. They gave themselves up. Cowards, however. They were free game. Throwing myself into a sprint, my mind spinning, I was aware that the others were already on my tail. The rules were simple. Just like the card game, cowards were caught, dragged back, and skinned alive. I had already made my decision, and going back to the bunker was suicide. Father was very strict with his rules. We were not supposed to leave the bunker. Adults and reformed kids brainwashed into bounty hunters plagued the underground tunnels, searching for threads. When I managed to get into the tunnels, however, throwing myself through the dark, ankle deep in sewage, there was no sign of hunters. "Vivi," Jack's voice echoed, almost startling me into place. "Vivi, come back. It's not safe." Jack's hesitant strides came to a halt. I could sense his fear of that single sliver of natural light leaking from above ground. Catching a glimpse of silver in the pitch black, I blindly reached out my hands. Ren's voice was in my head. "I've seen them. When I was on lookout with Jonas, we saw a ladder. Vivi, we can climb up and get out of here." He sounded so hopeful, and I had a sobering moment of vulnerability that threatened to send me to my knees. Grasping hold of the ladder, I lifted myself up, clawing my way toward the light. Light that was getting brighter, not the kind I was told about. Father said the sky was polluted bright red. He said the sun rose, but it was blocked out, casting an eerie red glow. When the world fell apart, nuclear power plants across the planet went into meltdown, and nobody could stop them. When I climbed through the metal grating, however, drinking in the sun's glare, sitting in a perfect crystalline blue sky, Father's words were suddenly obsolete. The world was not as empty as I initially thought. It was bright, colorful. Something flew past me, choking fumes filling my nose, a throaty yell following. Kid, what the fuck are you doing in the middle of the road? Adult. I ducked back into the ground, my body seizing up. The adult's words barely registered in my mind. He was right. I was kneeling in the middle of a main road filled with traffic, with cars. Father told us vehicles had been taken out by an electromagnetic pulse. Hey, are you good? Another voice. This time it was softer. The guy hovering over me was a teenager, maybe a year younger than me. He was a threat, but he didn't look like one. The boy's outfit took me off guard, a white shirt and jeans, a leather jacket flung over the top. His hair wasn't like the boys in the bunker. It was vibrant red and styled, and floppy, hanging over friendly brown eyes. In his hand was a rectangular device. Cell phone. Father told us phones were used as currency in the new world. This guy didn't look like a kid who was being hunted down, struggling to survive. He looked like a normal college boy. His eyes were bright, devoid of the hollow, cavernous look I was so used to seeing in others. Even Ren, with his wide smile, failed to hide his true feelings with his eyes. For a moment, I was disoriented by the sudden loud beeps around me and the baking sun on the back of my neck. The sun was supposed to be choked with pollution. The clouds were supposed to be a fairy tale. Turning my attention back to the stranger, I noticed one glaring detail. This kid wasn't malnourished like Jack and Ren. He was eating well. He was alive. Seeing people living their day-to-day lives and not suffering, it filled me with happiness. And then despair, when I could taste my best friend in my mouth. He was so salty. All at once, my body felt like it was crumbling. I was too aware of the world around me, gritty concrete scraping my palms and a cool breeze grazing my face. My stomach heaved, and I choked on Ren again. I think I was fucking screaming, my chest heaving with hysterical sobs, but I couldn't feel or hear anything. Couldn't even taste Ren as he dripped down my chin. I barely noticed the boy pulling me into his car, his voice a blur of panic. Fuck, are you okay? Did you just crawl out of the ground? Oh fuck, oh god, okay. This is bad. Let me take you to the emergency room. When someone across the road shouted if I was okay, I let myself fragment. Father had fed me so many lies. Lies designed to keep us submissive. The sky wasn't red. My generation wasn't being hunted down. Adults weren't monsters. And I was safe. Above ground, I was safe. He kept me from the surface with those lies. Ren had died for nothing. Pressed against the cool leather of the car seat, curled into myself, I struggled to breathe. When we started to move, reality hit me in convulsive lightning bolts. The world, according to Father, was of his own creation. So, what's your name? The boy asked casually. Do you sit in the middle of the road often? Or is that like a TikTok thing? The stranger tapped the steering wheel, clearly eager to ask more, but sticking to basics. I couldn't respond. My tongue twisted and wrong. I pressed my face against the window and watched life continue outside. I saw a mother with her baby, and tears pricked my eyes. The boy fiddled with his phone, and a song began to play through the speakers. I liked it. The rhythmic beat pulsed through my skull, pushing away my dark thoughts. Under the late afternoon sun, I finally took in the boy's face. He had freckles, just like Ren. Do you, need me to take you home or something? He cleared his throat. Or maybe the sheriff's office. I noticed his side eye, his gaze lingering on the ragged remains of my clothes. Instead of commenting on the deep red stains on my shirt, he handed me a can. Soda. Real soda. A luxury in the bunker. I had only tasted lukewarm Diet Coke. I drank it down quickly. It was fruity, perfect, and refreshing. The guy laughed. Geez, don't drink it that fast. I found my voice. Sorry. No, you don't have to apologize. The boy sighed. Where do you live? If you want, I can take you home. I'm Jordan, by the way. Vivi. His smile was warm, though the more I was looking at him, I could see that eerie blue light striking across his jawline. Vivi. Oh, nice name. Like Nefertari Vivi. He shook his head when I didn't reply, his expression sheepish. Please tell me you get the reference. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't cry. Father had lied about everything. Relief washed over me, warm and real. I didn't have to die. My eyes flickered, my head bouncing against the glass of the window. Outside, the streets were bustling. There were kids everywhere, and my heart was singing. I was watching a little kid run across the road with his parents when we drove past what I figured was a high school. Empty. The windows had been blown through, garbage covering the campus. Further down the road, however, another high school came into view. There they were, this time visible through looming metal gates. Kids. Hey, can I talk to Blue? Jordan's murmur brought me back to reality. Sir. He sighed. Yes, I've got one of them. He leaned back in his chair, his seat squeaking. Yeah. No, I'm not fucking stupid. 500. He turned his head, and I noticed the blue light attached to his ear flashing. 500, and you tell me where my brother is. We had a deal. I caught movement, his head tipping back. No, tell me where Ryan is, and it's yours. The 500 means nothing to me. Asshole. I think I fell asleep, my head still awkwardly pressed against the pane. When I woke up, Jordan was being yelled at. He was also doing some of the yelling. Oh, come on. I wasn't even going that fast. The sun was gone, late afternoon bleeding into twilight. I had never seen the night sky. I had never seen stars, or the sliver of the moon visible over the horizon. There was a figure outside the window, illuminated in floodlights, an adult. I felt myself stiffen up, before remembering adults weren't hunting us down. Father was. I was very clear. Jordan. The woman's voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard. If I caught you speeding again, I would report you. Yes, Miss Carter. The boy's tone dripped with sarcasm. I'm aware I was possibly definitely speeding, but as you can see, he gestured to me with flailing hands. This girl is clearly distressed, and I'm taking her to the sheriff's office. Jordan pulled out a piece of paper from under his seat. I have a license right here. I can see that. He whistled. All right. Well, I'll be on my way. Mr. Redbird, if you so much as touch that steering wheel, I will report you. But the woman cleared her throat. I can take it from here. Jordan's eyes darkened significantly. His smile strained. I said, I've got it. Jordan, would you like me to contact your employer? His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I'm one of their best. So no. Hand over the girl, and I won't say a word about your speeding. The boy scoffed, and I saw a whole other side to him. He reached out reluctantly, opening my door. She's all yours. To my surprise, he didn't move or speak when the woman gently grasped my arm. I was gently coaxed from the seat, and the door slammed shut. She wasn't finished grilling him. Are you chewing? Jordan. He shrugged. What? I can't chew and drive. The woman didn't reply, and he exhaled out an exaggerated sigh, opened his mouth, and pulled out the piece of gum. To my confusion, the lady plucked it from his fingers with a handkerchief. Thank you. He rolled his eyes. You're welcome. Have fun. A loud bang coming from the back startled me. Miss Carter shot the boy an accusatory glare. Car trouble. Mr. Redbird. Jordan glanced at me, a smile tugging at his lips as another unmistakable bang echoed from the back, this time louder. Yep, car trouble, ma'am. His smile had too many teeth. Have a great night. With a two-fingered salute, he drove off, leaving me with a face full of exhaust fumes. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a comfy chair in the sheriff's office, a towel wrapped around me. Miss Carter sat in front of me, the glare from her laptop screen bathing heavy-looking sleep circles. She told me to tell her everything, and when I did, spluttering out my whole life story, the woman paused to hand me a tissue. I didn't realize I was crying, swiping at my nose. Miss Carter was very helpful. She offered me drinks and some microwave noodles. According to her, my age placed me on the threshold of an adult in town. While they were tracking down my parents, I was offered a place at a boarding house for grown-up orphans. I was halfway through telling her about Ren when she asked for my tissue. I handed it over, and she offered a fresh one before jumping to her feet. Miss Carter's smile was kind. I wasn't used to kind. "I'm just going to process your details in the system," she said. "I'll be right back." Her words twisted my gut. That's what my mom said, before father took me from her. Mrs. Carter, she told me to call her Linda, was gone for a while. Her office was cozy, and slumped in my spinning chair. I was tempted to sleep. She left me with a laptop to play with, so the first thing I did was check out the internet. There was no disaster, and just like our town, the world continued on as normal. I was looking through online news articles when I started to feel nauseous. I wasn't used to normal food. In my search for the bathroom, I found another office. I could see Linda through the window. She had something pressed to her face, and I wondered if she had a nosebleed. But then I saw the creases in the tissue paper, and the realization started to hit me. It was my tissue paper, the one I swiped at my nose and mouth with. I could feel myself slowly moving back when the woman's eyes rolled to pearly whites, her lips parting. The way she moved in erratic jolts sent barf erupting into the back of my mouth. Linda was trembling, slamming the tissue against her nose and mouth, inhaling it like a drug, inhaling me like a drug. Just like father said. He said we were like a black market drug to them. I only caught a hold of myself when she dropped the tissue, her hand slipping into her jeans pocket and pulling something out. Jordan's used gum. It was sticky, wrapped around her pinched fingers. When Linda dropped it into her own mouth, I remembered how to run. When her mouth opened, wider and wider and wider, I was already out of the door. Twisting around, I no longer saw a human inside the room. Instead, a void-like mouth expanding, inky black darkness chasing after me. I got out of there and ran. Straight into Jordan. He didn't look fazed by my expression. "Let me guess," he said. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms folded. I had zero idea how he'd just casually walked into a sheriff's office. Jordan inclined his head, and there it was. That haunted, empty cavern in his eyes, the eyes of a thread. "Miss Carter just tried to eat you, didn't she?" In my panic, I tried to get past him, only for him to sidestep in front of me. "I can help you," he said. "I was trying to help you earlier, but you were kidnapped." Before I could speak, his expression darkened significantly. "You can either come with me or become a main course." His gaze flicked to my blood-stained shirt. "Your choice." I think I was going to go with Jordan, but then I remembered the banging in his truck. That blue light attached to his ear, I couldn't trust it. Shoving past him, I ran until I couldn't breathe. Over the last few days, I've been in hiding. I swiped a phone from an adult, and thankfully, it has the internet. The same car passes every day and night, and I know it's Jordan. But he's a thread. Why would he hunt down other threads? I can't stop fucking shaking. Father lied to me about everything, but I don't think he was lying about the town. The outside world is normal, clearly, but New Haven is something else entirely. I think the adults here are just like him, or even worse. So, if you are a kid in New Haven, please help me. The adults in my town are monsters with human faces. If you are an adult, I have a gun and I will shoot you. Please don't hurt me. Back in early August of last year, my husband Quarren and I went on vacation. We were going to do the tourist thing in one of the South's larger cities, but our trip was off to a rough start. We got stuck in baggage check-in for 2 hours. The self-check-in machines couldn't read our passports. When we finally got through, we got stuck in the security checkpoint and had to go through all our luggage. Because of all this, we missed our flight, and in turn, our connecting flight and a hotel transfer. We weren't pleased. After rebooking, we ended up with a total of 7 hours in delays before we got to the hotel somewhere around 11 in the evening. At that point, it turned out we'd been double booked. They were full. I was about to explode, while Quarren looked ready to sink through the floor. Luckily, the hotel had a second location downtown. It was more modern, a bit more expensive, and overall nicer. As a courtesy for their mistake, we got a replacement suite, an upgrade. Finally, some good luck. Right. We took an Uber there. The place was practically brand new. They had this electronic system where you didn't get a key. You got a personalized code that worked on every door. Quarren handled the codes while I signed us in. There was a 24/7 bodega with organic snacks, wine, and drinks right by the lobby. A sushi restaurant that closed at 11. A sauna, a gym, an indoor pool, and a whole bunch of complimentary things. A couple of free robes to bring home, and a bottle of white wine with a little "for your inconvenience" note attached. While Quarren took a shower, I ordered us some food and unpacked. We'd been traveling all day, and all nearby restaurants were closed, as instructed. I included the code for the outer doors so they could drop the bag off by our door. We got our late dinner by the time I was halfway through a shower. Quarren delightedly shared how he was going to town on our order. Apparently, it was so good and barely any left. Bastard. They had included 2 extra orders of tiramisu as a little treat, but I couldn't eat it. It had coconut in it, my one allergy. All in all, that night turned out pretty good. We shared a lukewarm meal, watched The Office, and went to bed. We talked a bit about our plans for the next day, picking one thing each from our prep list: a tour of the local distillery, a museum trip, dinner at a steakhouse, the good stuff. So after a long day, we called it a night. But that's where the story starts, at 3 a.m. that same night, when someone opened our door. See, one thing I hadn't realized was that the code for the outside door was the same as for our room. It was a single personal code system. Quarren had been the one dealing with it, and I hadn't thought too much about it. But what I'd accidentally done when ordering food was to, essentially, hand a stranger a key to our room. And that stranger was coming through the door. I tried to shake Quarren awake, but he didn't react. He was completely out, to a point that it worried me. I could smell something sour on his breath. My mind wandered back to the order we'd gotten, and that extra portion of tiramisu. I hadn't had any, so he had chowed down on both. What if it had been laced with something? The door hinges creaked, and I didn't know what to do. I'm 5'3", unarmed, and in my underwear. I decided, on a whim, to pretend to sleep. If they were just there to steal, at least I'd be unharmed. They were expecting us to be asleep, so as long as I played along, I should be fine. I held Quarren, closed my eyes, and waited. Careful footsteps made their way across the hotel carpet. The door closed, a slow pacing back and forth next to our bed. I counted at least 2 people, maybe 3. Someone could have stayed by the door. Just the guy, a man whispered. Bag him. They were unwrapping plastic. They weren't in a rush. I could tell they'd done it before. They were quick about it. I held on to Quarren, debating in the back of my head what the hell I was supposed to do. I was leaning towards waiting for them to leave the room and then immediately run outside and get help. But something shifted. One of the intruders made a hushing noise and waved the other one over. "What?" one of them whispered. "There," another answered. "The spoon." Since Quarren was the only one who'd had the tiramisu, one of the spoons were left unused. Only one of us had taken the bait. They knew one of us was awake. In the next breath, I was grappled. A hand covered my mouth and another my throat. I was pulled out of bed before I even realized I was struggling. I opened my eyes to 3 dark figures. They were speaking over one another in a moment of panic, one of them saying they were screwed. another saying they should just go, and a third reminding them that they had no choice but to bring me. I got a gun pressed to the back of my neck. One word, and you're done. Then we get him. Understand? I did. I stayed quiet. I couldn't bear the thought of Quarren waking up without me, but what choice did I have? Get dressed, they demanded. Now. They brought me through the staff area, past the laundry room. There was only a skeleton crew working the hotel at night, and most of them were in the reception area. These three could walk me out the back like it was nothing. Right outside, they had an inconspicuous sedan marked with a fast food delivery service logo. They were still talking as they put me into the back seat. They had to improvise a bit. They were supposed to take Quarren, and he was supposed to be out cold. I was wide awake, trying my best to memorize details about the intruders and their vehicle. One of them took off his belt and tied it around my head as a makeshift blindfold. They couldn't drive around with masks on. That'd get them pulled over. They tried to camouflage my blindfold a bit with a trucker hat, and at a glance, you'd be excused for missing that it was a kidnapping. "Why'd you want to bring the guy?" one of them asked. "Less hair gets stuck in the drain," the other mumbled. "More meat." Sitting in the back of that car was surreal. All the familiar sounds of a calm drive. Braking, accelerating, the clicking of turn signals. But all the while I felt the barrel of a gun poking into my side, right next to my heart. We were going pretty far out. There was at least a 40-minute ride, and we passed through a tunnel at some point. We must have used the highway. There were a lot of cars passing us. Then, we went off-road. The road got rougher, and the sound of other cars faded. As we came to a stop, they all drew a collective sigh of relief. Out, now. They put their masks back on and took off my belt blindfold. I only caught a brief glimpse of the outside area before they shoved me through the door. It was this large old industrial site, probably abandoned. There was a chain-linked fence lining the property. There were no lights on the outside, but the place had power. Stepping inside, the temperature dropped. Somewhere nearby there were these large fans, creating a powerful draft that swept through the building. I couldn't see them, but even from the hallway, I could hear them. The place was close to freezing. I'd just thrown on my pants, a shirt, and shoes. I didn't even have socks on. One of the attackers went ahead, while the other two stayed behind. We were in this long corridor with one door at each end, one leading outside, and one leading further in. We stood there for a couple of minutes while I heard raised voices in the room up ahead. Those who stayed with me didn't say a word. They just looked straight ahead, keeping a gun aimed at me. Not a word. The door at the other end opened. The third attacker returned, now in the company of what looked like a woman. She had sunglasses and a white face mask and was dressed in what can best be described as dollar store doctor's scrubs. She seemed upset and was scolding the man in a foreign language. Not sure about the origin, possibly Southeast Asian. One of the two men holding me seemed frustrated. He grunted. "Hey," he said. "What's the word?" "I don't know," the doctor woman groaned. "We always pick the man." So, she scoffed. "Could affect harvest. I don't know. Hormones." She smacked something into the hands of the man next to her and turned to leave. "Prepper," she called out as she hurried through the doors. "We try." I was dragged into a big, open space. It looked like an old warehouse. The doctor was nowhere to be seen. She must have gone ahead. There were doors all over, and I was taken into what looked like a shower room. They proceeded to hold me down and shave my head, these long tufts of brown hair sinking into the drain. I hadn't had short hair since I was a kid. I felt naked. It just took them a couple of seconds. They were fast, practiced. They lead me to a pair of double doors. One of them checked a digital watch. Another opened and tested a padlock. There was a collection of buckets next to the door, stained by something thick and blue. Time: 4:10, 4:10, or 4:11? 4:10. Check. They made a note on a piece of paper taped to the wall. Should we tape her? Doesn't matter, the one with the padlock said matter-of-factly. Been weeks. He's hungry. And that was it. The doors swung open, and I was pushed inside. The doors slammed shut behind me, and I was on my own. The padlock clicked, and the chains tightened. I just stood there for a moment, not even beginning to understand what was going on. After a couple of minutes, I snapped out of it. I wasn't immediately dead, so there was time to map the space I'd been thrown in. I was in a corridor branching off in 3 different directions. I got the impression that this was built recently. The corridor was no wider than 8 feet and had been wallpapered. Even the ceiling. It had an uncomfortable swirling pattern, a combination of white, brown, and purple. I'd never seen anything like it before. The ground was covered in a thick grey carpet. There were small fluorescent lights above, giving off this eerie illusion that the pattern on the walls were coming out. Somewhere off in the distance, there was a rhythmic thumping. It was getting closer, heavy footsteps approaching. I picked a direction and made a run for it. If you've never been chased by a predator, it is impossible to describe how it feels. It is, in a literal sense, dehumanizing. It makes you feel like less of a person. You become an animal, a thing, prey. You have to look at yourself and what you are, and what you can do, in a completely new light. It forces you to come to terms with the most honest, primal version of yourself. It is horrifying. It brought to light how long it had been since I ran, and how impractical my shoes were. I ended up kicking them off, barely stopping. I went down one corridor, then another, then another. I rushed past a small room with what looked like a pile of pillows in the middle. It stunk of ammonia, so I decided to take another route. It was getting harder and harder to tell where that rhythmic thumping was coming from, and it felt like I was about run into something at every turn. Then, I rounded a corner and saw someone. 2 people, a man and a woman, both dressed in bright blue wool-like turtlenecks. They had their arms firmly at their sides and stood shoulder to shoulder in a very unnatural and rigid manner, like 2 kids trying to hide something behind their backs. I stopped. For a moment, I thought I wasn't the only one locked in there. That maybe, just maybe, there were others. Maybe we could work together. Then I realized that the thumping had stopped. The moment I saw these 2, it was as if whatever was chasing me had stopped. The 2 of them lurched forward. It wasn't a step. It was like 2 mannequins being pushed. I turned to run as the thumping resumed, this time right behind me. I ran, screaming. All your senses go into hyperfocus, and you get 100 thoughts running through your head at once. Whatever minute detail your eye accidentally latch onto is burned into your mind to this day. I can recall the little things I noticed as I sprinted down the hall. Scratch marks breaking the pattern on the wallpaper, stains on the carpet, dark spatter on the ceiling. I ended up back at the room with the pillows. I decided to hide. Hurrying in, I realized it wasn't just a pillow room. This was some sort of lair. There was debris, branches, leaves, flowers, dirt. I dove right in and covered myself with as much as possible, ignoring the smell. I only had a couple of seconds. I was so panicked that I almost swallowed a flower petal, some kind of dry blue sunflower. I held my breath and hoped. The thumping grew closer. Then it slowed to a tip-tap, clicking. From where I was hiding, I could barely see anything. I could kind of see the edge of a turtleneck sweater. Then, something shifted. Now, I only saw the silhouette, but what I saw it didn't make sense. It was those 2 people I'd seen, but they were sort of moving, their arms twisted in an unnatural angle, looking more like insect mandibles. Their heads bobbed back and forth like some kind of growth or tail. Their chests vibrated and stretched. As they slowly came undone, they weren't 2 people. They were a single thing, pretending. Seconds later, something grabbed my leg. I was pulled out of the nest and dragged away at a violent speed. I flopped back and forth, slamming into the walls with every sharp turn. I broke 2 fingers by the second turn. I couldn't turn to see what had grabbed me, so I just tried to hold on to something. Anything. The carpet, the wallpaper, the walls, whatever I could, but the force was just too strong. There was no way. Then it stopped. I rolled over onto my back and came face to face with my attacker. And I didn't understand. To this day, I have a hard time describing it. There were so many moving parts. Segmented muscles, like living steel wires, mandibles, and a beak-like mouth. Patches of bright blue hair covering 4 extremities and part of a thorax. A pulsating abdomen. Something warm dripped onto my leg. Drool, perhaps, or a mild acid. It had the same color as the stains in the buckets I'd seen by the door leading into this place. It was a strange blue, and for some reason, that detail just sort of stuck. There were so many little movements at once, and I couldn't even get the scope of how big it really was. It seemed bigger than me, but it could just have long limbs. I couldn't make sense of it. It seemed insectoid, but its movement seemed calculated and intelligent. Then, pain. A bright, burning pain. I mentally blacked out. I flailed, spasmed, and kicked. It had me by the leg, and something sharp had pierced my thigh, picking at my flesh. I could feel my muscle pulling away from me. It was going to snap. I've never felt so vulnerable and exposed. To feel so mortal. It scars you in ways you can't understand, unless you've been there. Then, it pulled back, letting me go. Mandibles moved, clicking, hissing. I'd never seen anything like this thing before, but I understood it. It was such a human motion, in a way. It didn't like me. I tasted bad, and that made it angry. It disappeared down the corridor. I just lay there, panting. I didn't even attempt to move. I knew it would hurt like nothing else had. A couple of minutes passed, I think, maybe an hour. It was impossible to tell. In the distance, I could hear the rattle of the padlock. Perhaps my captors had heard my screams and figured that thing was done with me. Either way, they were coming in. But the moment I heard the door open, things took a sudden turn. Screams and shrieks, gunfire, thumping, popping, clicking, screeching. There was this one noise like a large rubber band snapping in two as a scream suddenly stopped. Panicked voices growing more distant. I sat up and used my arms and one good leg to scooch away. It took a long time, but it was the only way I could move. I didn't dare to look at my thigh, but I could tell it was bad, at least a 2-inch gash. I figured it hadn't hit an artery, at least, or I would be dead already. The moment I could see the double doors, I realized something had gone very wrong. The door was covered in a massive splotch of blood, still dripping. Scooching my way out the door, I saw the aftermath of something. The floor was covered in blood and viscera, some which was still moving. I couldn't tell where one person began and the other ended. My hands got slippery as I scooched down the hall, inch by inch. There was still the occasional scream. Someone was being chased. Making my way through that room was a living nightmare. Every now and then I'd recognize something human, like a hand or piece of a leg. I just pushed through. I was doing the movement out of habit at that point. I couldn't have stopped even if I wanted to. A final scream came to a stop. All that was left was the sound of dripping, and me dragging my wounded leg across the floor. In the long corridor leading outside, I found a pile of torn fabric. I didn't want to look at it, but I could see a bit of denim in there. I recalled one of my attackers wearing jeans and decided to take a gamble. I had to feel my way through something I'm not even going to attempt to describe, but I found car keys. As I made my way outside, I managed to prop myself up against the door and limp. Something must have hit a nerve. I had trouble moving my foot. It didn't even hurt. It just didn't work properly. I made it all the way to their car. My hands were pale white from blood loss, and I couldn't stop shaking. Looking back, there was no trace of the thing they'd kept in there. I got in, locked the doors, and took a deep breath. Looking back, I noticed something by the entrance. The doctor. She was coming out of the building, dripping with unspeakables. She seemed unharmed, but must have been in the thick of it. She could barely stand, and seemed just haunted. An empty gun dropped from her hand. She looked my way, briefly, and then just wandered off. The word that comes to mind was defeated, blank. I looked down for a second as I put the car in reverse. Looking back up, I saw that thing. It was standing by the entrance, again looking like two people in blue turtlenecks, stained with red. It looked my way, as if considering whether or not to allow me to leave. For a brief moment, it was quiet. We just looked at one another. Then it just closed the doors and retreated back inside. I managed to make it to a gas station. The owner called the police, and the rest is history. I don't think a lot of people read the articles about this. It was deemed as a drug-related gang thing, as the people involved were producing illicit substances. While I agree with this description to a point, I find it wildly misleading. Yes, that thing produced something, but what it was, and what it was used for, God knows. I've talked to Quarren about this 1,000 times, but it's impossible to make others see and understand what happened that night. It was just a couple of hours, all in all, but it completely turned my life around for the worse. To this day, my one foot is a lot duller than the other, and I always double and triple check my locks. I made a lot of mistakes that night. I didn't know how the hotel codes worked. Maybe I didn't fight enough when they brought me outside. Maybe it was stupid trying to hide. Maybe this whole thing boils down to me having the worst luck in the world to encounter this, and the greatest luck in the world to survive it. Quarren claims I have some kind of PTSD. I don't think he's wrong, but I don't think that tells the whole story. See, sometimes I see these people in the distance that just looks off. Two people standing in a peculiar pose. One person and two kids standing deep inside an alley, only to be gone the next time you look. I'm sure some of it is just trauma creeping back to the surface. I'm sure it is, but not all of it. Things in this world aren't always as they seem, and there appears to be much beyond our comprehension and what we are often taught growing up. This all started in the spring of 2018, when my fiancée and I decided to move back to her family's farm. Our first house was small, but the price was right, and it had what we needed with 5 acres and a barn. But after 5 years, the plumbing was having issues, and we found severe termite damage that was going to be more trouble than it was worth. Financially, we couldn't afford to build what we wanted yet. And even though we both swore we would never live in a double wide, that's what we decided was the best plan of action given the circumstances until we can build our dream barn dominium on the farm. So our house is delivered and set up in March. We have 50 acres that is bordered by the Ouachita National Forest. To an outsider, these mountains may not seem like much, but it's one of the oldest mountain ranges in North America, and erosion beyond our comprehension dwindled what easily rivaled the Rockies into what you see today. This was a dream for an outdoorsman like myself. Not only did we have our own 50 acres to hunt on, but thousands upon thousands of acres of deciduous mountains to roam freely. But the farm did have its oddities, and weird things sometimes happened. The first year we dated, we hunted a couple times there, and I discovered very quickly the land behind the barn was uncomfortable. It just gives you the willies and feeling of being watched. This area has a rich history of a main wagon trail, an Indian trail very close by. Then there's the history of the haunted inn that is on the property adjoining ours, with the inn having burned down years ago. There were many shootings over poker games and stagecoach robberies, some even reported to have been by the James Gang, and the possibility of gold buried nearby from them, or the Knights of the Golden Circle. Maybe that history contributes to those feelings somehow. The property basically laid out like a rectangle with 2 large barns on the east side, where the driveway comes up from south to north and runs back west like a large L. First was our house. The next house was my fiancée grandma's, and at the inn was my soon-to-be in-laws. I walked over to my in-laws to get some screws working on the porch, and that's where it all started, even though I was unaware until the next day, but more on that later. It was dark out when we decided to go feed our goats that were over at the barn. As we walk out, my fiancée said something big and black ran through the yard. I was like, well, how big? Our door is a mere 30-yard to the tree line that goes straight up the mountain, and we have bear from time to time, but she said more like a large dog. We got in the Jeep, and instead of heading to the barn, I turned west towards the in-laws to use the headlights. And sure enough, there was yellow eye shine and the outline of a large black dog that was maybe 60 yards from me. I get out with a cheap flashlight and call to the dog, but I get bow reaction. Just two large yellow eyes staring back perfectly still. So I approach the it, slowly talking to it, trying to call it over to me, and it just trots back toward my yard. So I walk down the drive back into the yard and trying to approach it again, and I get about 25 yards from it this time, but something wasn't right about it. It all felt off. I wasn't scared or feel threatened really, but it didn't feel right. Then it hits me, like a ton of bricks. It was as if this thing absorbed light like some dark void from another realm. No matter how hard I tried to focus my eyes or adjust the light, I couldn't make out anything with this thing before me, other than it appeared to be a dog that absorbed light. Cool, that's believable. It eventually grew tired of me, wandered off across our field to the road, and I wrote it off as a neighbor's dog and moved on with my night. The next day, my fiance's grandma asked me about our big black dog. I replied with a puzzled look, and we don't have a black dog. She told me when I walked back over from getting the screws the previous day that it came down out of the woods and had followed me back towards our house. I told her that must be the dog we saw last night. I had told my fiance about how it seemed to absorb light, and something just didn't seem quite right with it all. And it was also massive. My shepherd is 70 lb, and our Pyrenees Anatolian mix was 85 lb, and it dwarfed either of them. 2 days passed without seeing the dog, and it was out of mind and wrote off as a neighbor's dog from down the road, or one that was dumped. 2 a.m., I'm awakened by my shepherd and Pyrenees in the house going ballistic, barking, growling, trying to get out of their kennels. I get up, walk to the outside door quiet as I can, while the digs go ballistic and flip on. The light and the beast was on my steps and appeared to have been sniffing around the door. Soon as I turned the lights on in one fast motion, this thing did a 180, leapt off the steps, and was gone into the darkness again. But this time I saw it tail. A long, bushy tail like my shepherd's, but bigger and pointed ears. The black wolf. I know what you are thinking, it doesn't scary, but to see it, the way it seemed to absorb light, it felt like pure evil, pure hatred. Something was very unnatural about it. My brother-in-law calls me a few days later and asks if I've seen a huge black dog or had any issues. He lives down the road and just through the woods from us, so I told him about it following me and the encounters. He tells me that his pit bull he keeps out back was going wild the night before, and he went back. There, with a good bright light and 30 wide away in the woodbine, was a set of yellow eyes staring back. It would close its eyes, and he said you couldn't see anything, like it was trying to hide. This went on a few times before he finally saw it and described it the same way I did. Yellow eyes shaped like a large wolf, but its body, that endless black pit. Somehow it absorbed all light, and you couldn't make out any details other than yellow eyes and the outline. The day after our wedding in early May, my brother-in-law calls me to tell me it came back the night of our wedding. They got home after dark, was just sitting on the porch when he heard bawling and screaming from the woods. He grabs a 12-gauge pump and his light bears feet to investigate, and there's the black wolf again in the edge of the thicket. Just the yellow eyes piercing back at him. Deciding he's had enough, he took aim and fired. But he didn't expect what happened. A set of blue eyes suddenly appeared and dropped to the ground, and the yellow eyes vanished seemingly. He cautiously approached to see a small fawn with spots laying there, where the wolf had stood slobber all over its back and looking dazed. He went to pet it, but it stands up, runs off right into a tree, falls over, gets back up and bounds off deeper in the woods. He looked for the wolf but didn't see anything else, and there was no blood. He chalked it up to it had caught the fawn, and he interrupted dinner and apparently missed. We spent all our money to move, putting in septic, dirt work, etc., so our honeymoon was a weekend at home before it was back to work. I told my wife I wanted to go investigate his claim. We get to his house and he recounts his story as we make our way to the location. I look for blood, hair, anything, and find nothing. So I start making circles in the woods and come across a big doe that was undoubtedly the little fawn's mother. I find no signs of injury on her and can only assume she was hit by a car, and that's just where she made it to. Saddened for the poor fawn, knowing it won't survive, and likely ended up being dinner for the wolf or coyotes. Days passed without the wolf coming back. Turned to weeks, turned to months, then the dream happened. We were at a horse show, and my mother-in-law was trying to get my wife to get this horse. I told her absolutely not. We are not getting another horse, no way. It was a solid black gelding with a white blaze on its face. Next thing I know, I'm in my kitchen looking out the window into the round pen, and that horse is standing there staring at me. My in-laws had gotten it anyway. I went to ask my wife about it, but couldn't find her. And when I looked back, it changed to a very dark, very weathered, haggard Indian-looking lady with long matted black hair, in dreads, long yellow fingernails, and wearing a very tattered, dirty, long black dress with it over her head. The material almost looked like weathered burlap or fringe, and when she saw me looking at her, she smiled. Even though it was a dream, I can still remember the smile. The nastiest yellow teeth ever. I spent the rest of my dream asking people about the witch that lives in the woods by the barn. Things pretty much calmed down after that for a while. Every now and then I'd see a tree with claw marks about 6 feet high that I figured was a bear. One night, while skinning a big 10 PT buck, something between us at the barn and our house lets out a huge raw growl. Anytime you skin deer at the barn at night, something paces just inside the thicket. Sometimes it will come right for you, but shine the light and there's nothing to see, and it stops moving. Soon as you ignore it, it will start to move again. I always leave the carcass, and the next day they are gone. My wife was alone in the barn taking care of a goat that just had babies and getting them situated while I got something she needed from home. These were originally hay barns, so the upper half on each end is open so you can hear outside pretty well when something growls at her from right outside the barn, and she tells me to hurry up and bring a rifle. But besides that, everything was pretty calm, until it wasn't. I'm not sure what changed. It's been a few years since the wolf was around, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was back. I had off-the-wall nightmares, wake up in a state of fright at random. My shepherd would wake us up at 2 a.m., sometimes nights in a row, barking, growling, and wanting out. I let her out the first time, and she bolts straight up the mountain. I grabbed a shotgun that stayed by the door, no light, and took off after her. I finally got her called back to me, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like it was trying to lure her up the mountain. Maybe because IT knew I would follow. Sometimes we would wake up because it sounded like something slapped the house, but we never could find anything. It happened again. My shepherd losing her marbles at 2 a.m. wakes me up, but this time there's terrible screams coming from the goat's pen. I rush out, but it's too late. Whatever it was is gone, and so is one of the goats. The rest huddled into a corner of the shelter, trembling. I could hear the goat's cries as it was carried up and over the mountain at incredible speed. I felt so defeated. This was war. It has to stop. This land is ancient, but now it's our land. It's our home. We will not be ran off. I searched online and found no help, just a lot of people that fake scary things for social media attention. No real info, so I went to folklore. I cast some 405 GR bullets with silver mixed into the lead and loaded them in Starline brass. I was going to put that new 45/70ths with the tritium front night sight to good use. It was cool out that evening. I had my favorite meal in case it was my last. I had no idea what I was up against or if this would work. Would it even show up again? I climbed up on my roof and settled in. The moon was about 3/4 full, so plenty of light to see from my elevated position. I started to downsy off. I couldn't keep myself awake, it seemed. I awoke with a start. No idea how long I'd been out, but it was silent, uncomfortably silent. I caught movement by the drive as a large, low black shadow crept in towards the goats. I steadied that green glowing front sight on whatever my adversary actually was and squeezed the trigger. Click. Oh no. In my sleepy state, I forgot the stupid crossbolt safety that won't let the hammer fall all the way. The black wolf stands up on its hind legs, lets out the awful roar divided by growl that we have heard before, the most primal sound you have ever heard. It reverberates in your chest, it's so loud, but I could barely hear it over the adrenaline dump and racing heartbeat in my ears. I cocked the hammer again, took the safety off as it dropped back to all fours, and squeezed the trigger. The heartbeat in my ears was replaced by tinnitus from the roar of the rifle, and I lost some of my night vision from the muzzle flash. The beast had fell to the ground, thrashed about, then bolted back into the woods. I stayed up there till daylight watching. After the sun came up and it was plenty bright enough to see, I walked to where the best stood, and there was nasty-looking hunk of grey meat that smelled awful. It was the most rotten, putrid smell you could imagine. I knew it had to be there. That was a 405 GR slug that can easily stop a grizzly mid-charge. As I made it to the woods, I could see small spots of dried blood, but not much, and not creature. I followed the trail where I could see overturned leaves, a broken twig or ground disturbance. After I made it to the top, I was really hoping I had recruited some help. I pushed on, being cautious and watching, trying to not be led into a trap of its own. I followed the trail over to the property line of the haunted inn. The land was up for sale. It never had anyone own it for long, it seemed, and I had a job to see through, so pushed on. It led me down the mountain towards where the inn used to be. Before I reached the site of the inn, the trail led me by what appeared to be an old, unmarked grave and back up the ridge and up a steep, narrow ravine with large chunk rock and boulders. At the very top was a small opening to a cave or abandoned silver mine, possibly. The area stunk so bad I could hardly keep from throwing up. The large rock overhang had some kind of old symbols carved into it, but no time to be distracted. I looked into the hole as best I could see, and I swear there was an old spear in there like what the conquistadors carried. There was no way I was fixing to go in and find out, though. Between the smell, the horror of what I had seen, and how it made it all the way back here after being shot, I was done. I wanted to go home, so I did. It's been 3 years now with no sightings or strangeness. I just make sure and leave a deer at that corner of the property every year. It's never there when I come back. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.